The first option you'll likely come across is GameObject.find. This allows you to pass in the name parameter and the corresponding game object will be returned. For example, you can do GameObject.find GameManager and now you can access the GameManager object. You should ideally only do this once and in the start method, so you can store the result in a local variable and prevent the need to keep calling .find, as this can introduce performance issues. A second approach is to set things in the Unity inspector. This involves creating a public field or a private field with a serialized field attribute, then going into the inspector and dragging the object you want to access into the field in the inspector. If you forget to set the object, you'll get a null reference exception when you try to access it. The main problem I find with this method is that if you change the name of the field in your class, it will unassign the object in the inspector and you'll have to go back into the editor and assign it again. This becomes a big pain if you're working on a large project. The final and recommended approach is using the singleton pattern. This is a commonly used approach, but it's typically not the first thing you'll come across in tutorials and documentation, but personally I've found it the easiest and cleanest way to access singleton objects. First, you need to create a base abstract class that will be inherited by all your singletons. For this example, we will call our singletons managers, and the subclasses will be things like game manager, audio manager, and so on. The abstract manager class itself can't be instantiated, it's just inherited by other objects. It uses this manager T syntax, which allows us to dynamically set the type of the instance. This means we can have a game manager with an instance of type game manager, an audio manager with an instance of type audio manager, and so on. The static instance field stores the single instance of the manager. This means that wherever you access the instance, you'll be accessing the same object. This is different from regular objects where you can instantiate lots of them and they will all have their own values, like multiple enemies with different health. In a singleton, let's say a game manager, you can have a score field and every object accessing the score would be accessing the same value. The awake method ensures it's set up before any start methods run in other classes, making sure it's available to access immediately. The null check ensures that only one instance of a manager exists. If an instance already exists, the duplicate is destroyed. Otherwise, it assigns itself as the singleton instance and is accessible through the instance field. So what if the script I want to access isn't a manager type object or another kind of singleton? In this case, you can use either of the first two approaches. Personally, I like using the serialized field and set an inspector approach. This removes the need to pass in a hard-coded string into the find method. And I find it easier to debug if you forget to assign it in the inspector, because you'll get a null reference exception. It also means writing less code, which means there's less code to debug. However, I don't see any major issues using the .find approach if you wish to, as long as you minimize its use so you don't run into the performance issues mentioned before. For me, as a solo developer, it's important to use what you're comfortable with and what helps you develop quickly, while at the same time maintaining good programming standards.